Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Blacktop Bootlegs. Today's episode is actually a repair tutorial. We're going to be looking at SPECLATRON figures, which are He-Man knockoffs. Really interesting looking figures, lots of crazy designs. The coolest thing about these is the clear body, which is supposed to be filled with water and glitter, but unfortunately there are very common issues with each one of these figures, so I just wanted to go over them briefly. All the parts for these characters are very modular, very easy to take off. The heads are soft vinyl and pull off very easily. You definitely want to take your time and try not to damage any of the paint on the head. I was actually planning on repainting this one, so I was being a little brutal. So once the head is removed from the figure, you'll see that there's a stopper or some kind of plug in there, usually surrounded by a lot of adhesive. This is actually a really large stopper. The usual cork for these is very tiny. I have an example here. It just snaps in very easily. The Orion figure was created later on in the SPECLATRON series, so I think they were aware of some of the failures that were happening with the corks, and they tried to beef up the seal at the top. So to begin, we're just going to fill this guy with water and try to remove as much of the original glitter as possible. It's just going to be a filling and emptying process for a while. You're probably going to want to do this up to like 6 times, just to flush the figure out as much as you can, and try to save as much of the original glitter as possible. Just keep dumping it all into the same glass. I should have told you initially, the arms and legs on these things come off very easily. I should have taken them off before I got started. It just makes dealing with the body much simpler. You're dealing with a small bottle instead of screwing up the paint on the arms and legs, and it's just more cumbersome. Looking down into the body, you can see there's a little bit of gunk buildup in there. Contact lens technology is actually going to help us out here. We're going to use multi-purpose solution, which you use to remove protein buildup on lenses, and use that to help flush out the interior of the body of this figure. Usually I would let this stuff sit overnight, but just for this tutorial we're just going to crank it out and do it all in one day. You can see I'm pumping water into the hips there. You can see we have some glitter stuck to the waistline. We'll clean that off later. So cleaning out the interior is pretty tedious. You're going to need a lot of Q-tips. I'm pretending to clean this out, but you get the idea. You just want to knock all the glitter that's stuck to the side off, just break the surface tension. You really don't want to sit there and try to pull out piece by piece, but if you just knock it off the sides, fill it up with water, shake it around, you should be able to dump all of the glitter out from the interior. We've finally ended up with a clean body, so now it's time to clean the glitter. So dumping out the gross fluid through a paper towel to kind of save the glitter that we want, and then we're actually going to rinse it again and again and again until we get all of the weird stuff that was growing in that fluid to go away. Just want to keep adding clean water to the glitter, stirring it up, and dumping off the debris that floats to the top. So it's kind of like panning for gold. The gold's going to stay at the bottom, all the other crap just sloshes off in the top. So you'll do that maybe 4 or 5 times, or whenever you stop seeing weird debris floating around in the water. You can just leave the glitter in the glass and let it dry out, or you can also dump it out into a paper towel and let it dry off overnight. I really have done it either way. It really doesn't matter too much. So then when it comes to replacing the cork to seal this guy up, I originally bought some corks for powder coating. The first lug that I bought was actually way too thin. I was trying to match the original diameter. So then I bought a second set of these yellow corks, which work very well. They're super long, which is great because the necks of each SPECLATRON figure is a little different depending on how the machine crimped off the plastic. So what you do is just dry test this thing, wedge the cork into the figure, determine how much of the cork you actually need, and then you can just cut off the excess and insert the cork again. So I'm going to cut off about, I don't know, 1/4 inch here. If you're having difficulty getting the cork into the neck, you can just cut a little angle off the edge of the cork to help with fitting the larger cork into the smaller hole. So in this case, we're getting a nice snug fit, so it's time to get our glitter back. We have our original glitter here rinsed on a paper towel. Normally you would let that dry overnight, or you can actually replace the glitter with new glitter. It's important to buy square glitter for this project just so you can at least match the original style of the toy. There is modern glitter that's octagonal. I tend to think it's not as nice as the original stuff. Usually the glitter would just slide right down a card into the neck. I'm going to use a funnel here because we still have water that's causing the glitter to stick together. You can just tap it right down into the body and all the glitter should go in fairly easily. So then we fill the figure up with saline solution. The only reason we're using it is because it's a sterile solution, usually used for contact lenses. Making sure again to pump the lower chamber of the figure to get it filled with saline. There's always going to be a bubble at the top of the toy, no matter how good you are with fitting the cork in. Definitely helps to tilt the figure on its side when you're putting the cork in, just so the glitter isn't getting in your way. So now that we have the body corked, we're just going to put the head back on and the limbs easily snap back on. Give the figure a final rinse to get any excess glitter off, and you're done. So that's it for Orion. Looks so much better when it's filled with water and not just empty. You'll see later in the video I actually do repaint his face and it looks a lot better just using some vinyl paint and a brush. So let's move on from Orion to Attic. Now we have a different problem, which is the hip failure. What seems to happen here is that either heat or maybe a slow leak has some kind of bad reaction with the plastic that's used to bind the two halves of the character together. Removing the glue on the hip is actually fairly easy. I was able to clean this all the way off with some hot water using my hands and fingernails to avoid hurting any of the original plastic. So just stick with water and time on this. So on Attic, you can see we have a good example of the original plug. I went ahead and peeled away some of the adhesive before showing you the top of the head, which I shouldn't have done. What we're left with is this weird little cork of sealant inside. Just take a razor knife and slowly pull down the little lip, kind of breaking the surface tension of the bit of sealant that's there, peeling it off, and then using the knife to kind of wedge it out, being careful not to scratch or cut any of the original plastic. You can see the original cork versus the newer cork. Definitely a huge difference there. You can see how the glitter really just becomes plastered to the side of the figure, and it's really impossible to get off just shaking water around. You really need a Q-tip to get in there and just kind of break the surface tension between the two. I actually end up using the stick of the Q-tip in some cases to get really hard spots out. When the Q-tip's wet, the stick actually becomes soft as well, so you don't have to be worried about scratching the surface. And then here's an example where I left the glitter in the glass overnight and let the water dry out, and it was very easy to knock the glitter off of the glass and then put it back into the toy. So now we have two nice clean halves, but now the problem is we need to glue them together. I'm actually going to tell you to use solvents to clean off the areas that need to be glued, but you need to be very careful with this. So what I actually use to do this is fingernail polish remover on the areas that we will never see. So we're using it on the waistline. We don't want any soap on there, and the same goes for the clear bottle portion of the figure. Just cleaning off all the remnants of the old adhesive. But now that we have a clean body bottle and clean waistline, the bottom portion is made out of polypropylene or polyethylene, which is almost impossible to glue. Most of them were assembled when they were hot, so it's much easier to glue these materials when they're straight out of the mold hot. So what we're doing is just we're using the torch to heat up the plastic very slightly so that it will bond better with the adhesive that we're using. The heat treating of that plastic actually lasts for a decent amount of time. If you wait like 30 minutes, the heat treating is still going to be okay. So we're using a marine epoxy called Flex Set. A little more expensive than normal marine epoxies, but it's definitely what you want to use in this situation. Plastic well does not work. Silicone will not work. Marine epoxies usually don't work. I found that Flex Set is really the only thing after heat treating that works with the SPECLATRON figures. You can always break the toy if you want to. It's really easy to pull the halves apart, but I found that Flex Set is really the best thing in this particular scenario. So you just mix up the material as thoroughly as you can, and then you're going to apply it so that there's a little bit of overhang into the interior, just trying to create a good seal. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's definitely good to have a lot of material around there just so that you're guaranteed to get a good seal when you put the halves together. So I'm kind of spinning the Q-tip a little bit to drive adhesive into the groove, and then trying not to get too much excess far out to the edge of the figure, because when we switch the two halves together, the epoxy is just going to want to squeeze out. Holding my finger at kind of a 45-degree angle here, wiping off a lot of the excess, and then we're just going to fit the two halves together. The working time on the epoxy is probably like 15 minutes, and then the set time is 24 hours. So slowly pushing the two halves together, trying to get that Oreo effect where you get that little ring we put around the belt line merging with the portion that we just put on the other half, and we get a little bit of glue squeezing out around the edges, which is totally fine. You can look through the top of the bottle to make sure you have a complete seal. Use your finger or a Q-tip to wipe away the excess. Another thing to keep in mind when you're gluing the halves together is to align the halves together properly. If you glue it with the halves perfectly lined up, the center buckle will actually be too far to the left. Once we get the two halves set together, you can either clamp them or just set them to the sides. Several hours later, we have the body bottle taken care of. Then I go through the whole process that I went through on the other toy, where we're rinsing the glitter, cleaning the parts, and corking it off. You can see on Attic, I actually went in and painted the white adhesive black with a little bit of vinyl paint. Really, the repair kind of disappears and you don't see it at all. Much better than it was before, and it's just great to see the figures functioning again. If you're worried about pressing them and pulling them apart, totally valid concern. You can just dump the characters upside down like a snow globe. It's really effective enough. Really great to see the toy doing what it's supposed to do. Probably the only time that a guy should be playing around with a whole bunch of glitter. But that's it, a SPECLATRON repair tutorial. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay tuned for more Blacktub Bootlegs.